Good words.
Yeah, well, the coming from the awareness that you were talking about, Richard, I think awareness, the easiest thing I find in my time living abroad is the awareness of difference. So when I think about living in Japan and I was living in the middle of nowhere, my difference is very, very apparent. And for better or for worse, there were aspects of that that made it really clear. It kind of put me outside the culture, outside the game that is being played. And I mean, I lived there for 5 years, and even after 5 years, I know that I would never fully be able to understand everything involved and the nuances of the culture. Um, and I'm using this game, this like the idea of game very. I want to search for a better word, but I want to transition now because I'm in Germany. So now the game here is different. The culture here is different. I look like everybody. And one of the things that I've found um, is that I'm really used to being different. I know how to operate in that context. It's much more difficult for me to look the same but know that I'm not. It's endlessly confusing. And so bringing it back to this game, we've got these different cultures, these different games in which there are certain rules and certain contexts in which we adopt or don't, depending on our awareness and our willingness. Um, but then there maybe this is what you've been talking about, Richard, is what about the overall game? What about the fact that there is all of this change? And our nationalities start to kind of hinder the fact that we have something that we need to be playing at a greater level too. And what I'm really talking about is our earth, our mother earth, our climate. And the only way for us to band together in that is for all of us to come together under this one game, this one culture, this global culture of understanding what we're actually working towards. Because the game, there are rules within that. What rules are we going to adopt and what are we going to understand that we're trying to get to? And if we're not doing that together and we're putting our nationalities ahead of that, that's going to mean that there's still all of these different games that are being played. Um, I don't know. This is something that I'm thinking about constantly. So if that made sense, great. If it didn't, it's because I'm still figuring it out. Yeah.
Interesting. You talk about you say games, and when I think about games, it's like we play games, and there's good games and there's kind of messed up games, and I think internationally and culturally, as we apply this back to make the distinction between America and the rest of the world, the games that are played, from my experience, are inappropriate games because they're games that are win-lose games. And and this is where I'd like to defer to you, Elena, in the context of enculturation. When I think of Japan and I think of the culture of Japan, there's a sacred, I'm familiar with the Bushido code, right? The code of the samurai, right? I'm not sure how consistent it is in modern day, but there's kind of a respect and an honor, right? And I know that in that culture that there's this thing about face and you need to save face, right? And there's this, it's almost like if you're playing a game to try to win over somebody, it becomes a win-lose type thing. I get the impression that other cultures see America as kind of a win-lose game, whereas maybe other societies are all about how we can help one another out and create a win-win proposition. What's your angle on that, Elena, based on your experience, specifically in
In
Japan?
Japan,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, definitely, but to a fault. um, like to an inefficient fault is what I see and hear. I mean, again, this is only just my experience, but when your superior or someone who's been at the job longer or the school longer, you're going to stay longer than them. This idea that we're all kind of we're working together, but there's also this very specific hierarchy that you can see within the samurai tradition too, but there's always this differentiation between how we're honoring the people around us. And it's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, but also from this very efficient, like, I need to take care of myself perspective. There's a lot of issues with people working too hard, trying to meet that, trying to show up as much as they're supposed to show up, even in like to a detriment. But I think in the States, we're trying to explain why we do what we do. Like, if you tell me to do something, I want to know why you want me to do it. In Japan, there's no why do you want me to do it? I'm just going to go do it. And I'm lucky, or I was lucky, to be outside of that, because I just got to operate outside of that, but I saw it. Yeah, so I think that there's got to be a middle ground, and I see that Japan is asking for, well, I shouldn't say Japan. I should say that my people in Japan are asking for different things, different ways of thinking about self-actualization. I just talked to a young artist. She's maybe I think like 7 years younger than me. We talked over the weekend, and she's craving the kinds of conversations that we're having here. Because what we are talking about as Americans, we can't help but get away from kind of this, we're being collective, but yet we hold an individualism within that I think in some ways allows for this conversation. Maybe. There's some aspect of that. I would really have to think about that sliding scale in terms of how we show up in these conversations. Yeah.